Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reschool'd podcast, the podcast that discusses all the things that schools may have not prepared you for. As always, I'm AJ, and with me again, my friend and co-host Jason. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, AJ. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, my wife right now is baking, and that aroma is coming through the house, and I am hungry, and it's going to be one of those shows where even if it lasts 30 minutes, it's going to feel like it's lasts 30 hours.
Your head's going to be in other places. I understand completely.
I'm hoping that I don't do those Freudian slips and have food in my words today.
What's she baking?
Some kind of cake. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
See, and I'm typically not a big sweets person, but every once in a while I get a sweet tooth, and man, it's all I can think of.
Oh, but baking bread, man, the cake. There's whether you're a sweets person or not, that smells good. That's going to make you hungry. So,
oh man,
I'll try to keep you on track. How about that?
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. To kind of go back to what we talked about last episode, we talked about motivation and how to get motivation, what motivation is, and how to maintain it. In this episode, we're actually going to start a new series. This is our tips and tricks series. This tends to be, from when I talk to my students, the one that they're looking forward to the most, because who doesn't like a little tip or trick or hint to get past something, maybe not necessarily cut a corner, but help you strategically get a bit of an edge. And in this series, the first chapter we're going to be dealing with is note-taking. I think this is one of those areas outside of what we're going to talk about in the next one, which is studying. I think these are the two areas that students tend to have troubles with the most. I know at least I did.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one because in my classes, without fail, I deal with students all the time who I know that they have all the ability in the world. I know that they have a good grasp on certain concepts that we're going over. The most difficulty that they have in completing the class is that they have really poor studying skills, note-taking skills, things like that. So to the extent we can help with that, I'm really excited.
Yeah, and I could tell you from me growing up, I struggled with that, especially at the beginning of my college career. I got better because I took the time to actually learn it and enhance my ability. I will say, though, this episode is going to be a little bit different because we are talking with tips and tricks. We're going to do our top list. Now, we're not going to say top 10 list or top 5 list because we've both come up with our own that we haven't talked about with each other. And so we both came up with about 5, but there's a good chance that some of ours are going to overlap or be the same. So these are just our top list of note-taking tips. And so we're going to be doing that in our main section.
All right, but before we jump into the material today, I want to remind everybody, please visit Reschool'd.com. That's Reschool without the E. That's Reschool with a D.com. You'll learn more about us, see our series, see the episodes that we have under each series. Visit our social media handles, Reschool'd Pod on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Also, check us out on your favorite podcasting app, whether it's Google, Spotify, Apple. Like us, get notifications when we drop new episodes. And like I say, on our website, we hope to hear from you as well with your questions, tips, success stories, because that's an important part of our show.
Absolutely. And if you like what you hear and you want to support the show, please leave us a 5-star review. We'd love to hear from you in that way too. It would help us out a lot too. So let's get into our quick question of the day. And it's actually we're going to go back to the grade the statement, where we grade this statement on an A to F, and we're going to explain ourselves. And this one's going to get real personal because it's dealing with, obviously our topic is note taking. Jason, grade yourself on your note taking skills in college.
I would say I began as a B+, A-.
Jeez.
And made my way up to a solid A+. I was a good note taker. I was very good.
I thought you were grading on a curve.
Yeah, no, it was just in high school, I had a big turnaround. I focused really hard on learning how to take notes and how to use that for studying purposes. And honestly, I got very good at it. That's kind of what carried the day for me.
Well, that would make sense because you are a very structured person, and that kind of coincides with note-taking as being organized and structured. And mine's an easy grade. When I first started college, my grade was an F, and that was grading on a curve. Because again, in high school, I never had to know how to take notes. I didn't have to study because I was a very audio-based learner. So if I can hear it, I retained it. And so I never learned how to take notes. The only notes that I took in class were the ones that really the teachers forced us to take because we had to take notes or whatever. And I would generally tell them, look, if you make me take notes, I can't pay attention. And if I don't pay attention, then I'm not actually getting it. So it's going to do kind of it's going to be counterintuitive, but it is what it is. It's not going to do much for me. And so they tend to understand that, especially once they saw my grades. But when I got into college where I actually needed note taking because things were coming at me a lot quicker, I was struggling. It was hurting. And that's when about a year and a half in, and really kind of when I got into business school and I moved over from chemistry to business school, is when I took the time to learn how to take notes. I looked through and figure out what was the best practices. I practiced myself and I tried to get better at it. But even today, I mean, I probably would not grade myself more than by the end of college, I wouldn't grade myself higher than probably a B minus.
Well, I will say this, note taking is one function in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we'll get into next time, translating those notes and the material and the lectures and what you remember into study practices is a distinct difference
Yep.
there. And I broke down a lot between those two. I was very good about taking the notes and identifying the things that, I thought were necessary. But those secondary tasks, I started out, honestly, not as good as I should have been. And honestly, I've gotten a lot better, but still, I'm very lacking in that area. There are people who are far better at the secondary parts of note taking
Oh yeah.
than I am, and we'll talk more about what those are as we move forward.
All right. Well, let's get into the first question. We're going to do one question real quick just to kind of sum up everything, and then we're going to get into our top tips. What do we mean by note taking?
Well, to me, it simply means putting down in written format the things that jump out at you that you hear when listening to a lecture, when reading material, right? You basically pull out the pen and paper or you pull out the computer and you type out and say, this is the thing that is important to me from this section. The rest of it, I understand. This is what is the salient point that I need to cement in my mind as being the point that helps me recall everything else, that really helps put this material together with the next material I'm going to read or the next concept that's going to come up.
Yeah. I mean, note taking was just, like I said, one of those things that it was for me just to jot down those things that in my head I thought was important. But then in reality, when I got to studying it, I could possibly be picking out the wrong things to write down. I don't know. But the more and more I learned, the more and more I understood what value comes with different pieces of note taking. So there is the fallacy of I've got to write everything down. And actually that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in my tips is I got to write everything down. Everything it said I got to write down. And that's not true. And it's not practical. I mean, it's just that's not possible. Matter of fact, in my class, I understand that so much. In my class that I teach, I give notes that have fill in the blanks. So that will alleviate the pressures of, oh man, I got to write down everything they see on the slides or I just give you that outright. So it kind of eases that burden as well. So yeah, note taking has always been rough on me because I don't think I knew the meaning of it. I didn't know the best ways to do it. So,
and I will say this, the structure that we use to test people in college oftentimes focuses on, well, is the understanding of the material comprehensive? And we look for things that can demonstrate a wide understanding of the concepts oftentimes, particularly when we use fill in the blank or short answer or multiple choice test. So as much as I hate the aspect that people study for the test rather than study for general knowledge, being a skilled note taker it can cut two ways. You can be a skilled note taker for, hey, I really need to internalize these aspects of this concept. And I'd say that's more towards the general understanding learning aspect of it. And then there's the aspect of, oh, this will probably be on the test or it could show up on the test. So I'm going to write this down, even though this is not the core concept. This is not the most important or salient point here. But I focus on it just as much as the salient point. So oftentimes, I don't think we as professors do justice by our students or do right by our students in how we test some of these and how we require them to take notes in certain ways, to focus on some things that are less important than others. But when you take the notes and that they're on the paper, and when they make up a question on the test, well, if your objective there is making a higher grade, which it's generally is most people's objective, right? Then we're reinforcing a negative tendency in that
Yep.
way when it comes to getting the most out of your learning experience.
I agree. Well, let's get into our tips. We'll do them one I'll do one and then you do one. Just kind of go back and forth. And if we meet in the middle somewhere, I'll let you know, or
Okay.
we'll let each other know.
And I wrote down 5, so I'm sure out of that number, 1 or 2 of ours will cross over.
Odds are yes. My first one, the top of my list, is don't assume that there's one note taking style that's going to work for every class. And to kind of explain that a little bit, taking notes in a highly qualitative class, maybe like history or law, is going to have a different style, or at least should have a different style of taking notes than if you're in a highly quantitative class, like a math or finance class. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of the purpose of your learning or how you have to learn it. So history and law, and I'm going to speak more to history because I didn't take a whole lot of law classes and you're the expert in the law side. But history is, this is what happened. And typically you're tested on what happened. And so it's almost like a matter of fact. This is just, here it is, and I'm more or less memorizing it. Now, I do know law, there's a lot of connections because is it true that you have to, when you're explaining something, you have to cite something from the previous one and you're really answering a question? I can't remember much in law, but I know you typically have to cite previous court cases when you're bringing up an answer, correct?
It depends on the way you're being tested. At the undergraduate level, you don't have as much of that.
Sure.
It's more you're trying to identify the base concept.
Okay.
So being able to say that this is how this concept works, at least in my classes, is more important. At the graduate level in law school, it's completely different, right? It's more about managing the volume of material. So if you don't, to echo what you're saying, if you don't change your note-taking style, you'll end up with too much, right? In
Mhm.
law school, notes are a starting point, but notes are just a building block to get you to an outline. And an outline is just, bulleted aspects that help you basically understand all the material that's there. So it's a different function, like you say. I'd say the note taking for mathematics is as far from what you'll see in law school as, they're hardly even comparable.
Yeah. That's what I'm speaking this from an accounting side because I know in accounting, because it does have quantitative information and obviously we deal with numbers, but it is conceptual too. And I try to explain to students, and this is actually coming later on in the studying side when we talk about studying, but you need to understand why we do things in accounting, not so much the how. The how is easy, but understanding why we do it will let you know when you have to do it again, because if this happens, then you're going to have to do it this way again. Whereas if you just say, if this happens, this is how I have to do it, then you're going to know how to do that one instance. But if it comes up again in a different way, a different wording, you're not going to know it as easy. So it's a lot of it about the whys.
I think I'm hearing a second tip there, that understanding, what your purpose behind learning it is and what it means to learn it is going to affect the way you take notes.
Yeah. So you go ahead and give me your first tip.
Okay. So mine it's based upon the concept behind note taking. I actually heard you say earlier, I'm an audio learner type scenario. Well, some people say, well, note taking doesn't work for me, or I can't listen to somebody else's tips on taking notes. It won't help me. Well, that's a fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
Note taking, we know, helps everyone, right? Our ability to remember things is limited. There's that old saying, and I can't remember who the quotation is from, but the best memory is not as good as the shortest pencil,
That makes
right?
sense.
And note taking is kind of encapsulates that. You're taking notes about things so that, all right, here it is. It's in hard form. So when I come back to it later and I see it, it helps get me back to the place where I understood the bigger body of what I read or what I heard. So my tip is, in its most simple form, note taking really is for everybody. And there's no aspect of note taking that will not help you in some way based upon your learning style or based upon the subject that you're taking. One method of taking notes may be better than another, may be more efficient. You'll have to decide upon that yourself through practice. But note taking helps, it works. So that's a baseline understanding you need to go into that with.
Well, that makes sense. And I do think that runs right in line with what they say is the biggest mistake that any human makes. And that is, I don't have to write it down. I'll remember it later. I mean, it kind of goes directly with that. I mean, and more times than none, we forget what we were supposed to remember.
Yeah, it brings up that funny episode. If you ever watch Van Wilder,
Oh, yeah.
write that down. I don't have a pen. We'll remember it then.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Well, my number 2 is look at note taking as a 2-step process. There is an in-class section of it, and then there's an after-class section of it. So the purpose of the in-class notes is really to jot down the keywords, the phrases that you think are important. Now, that's the first thing. You don't want to, again, write down everything, but you want to jot down those key things. And then after class, this is where probably most students forget about or don't do. The after class notes is when you use those keywords and phrases to go back through your learning material, so your textbooks or whatever, and fill in the gaps, answer the questions that may have come up as you're doing this. And also, and here's the big one, formulate questions to ask during your next class session. You can get those answered from your teacher if there's still questions on your mind. Typically, we see notes as being a one-step process, which is just what we do in class, and then we're done. But it is important to go through and get the after class side of it as well. Take the extra step and use your text to expand your knowledge and your notes at home.
I'll agree with that completely. And as a matter of fact, you kind of touched on 2 of my points that are coming up. So if I can, I'll jump to honestly
Please
both of
go
them
ahead.
right now.
Go ahead.
First off, you said, you don't write down everything. Okay. Everything is written down for you in the book, right?
Yeah,
Or in the
absolutely.
assigned readings, assuming your professor's doing a good job of providing you external sources of the information that he or she is going over in class, right? But your point with note taking is to, once again, capture the things that may not make perfect sense to you prior to hearing them in class or prior to having that discussion amongst other students or with the professor, right? So what you're primarily going to do is you're going to summarize. You're going to bullet points that will help bring you back to that summary or that understanding that you were going for. You'll make references, sometimes just keyword references or one phrase references. Sometimes you'll draw little diagrams, right? That the diagram itself is a summary of what you just had there. So don't write everything down, but you do need to have some way of referencing back. So coming up with that method that works for you, I'm a big bullet person rather than short summaries. I like to see things outlined in bullets at different levels, right? Indented at different levels, sub-bullets, okay? I'm a big diagram person, okay? So between those. And then the other point you hit on was you got to keep working with your notes. That is a big misstep that I see among students. They take notes and then they close their notebook and they don't look at the notes again until next class period. They move on to new material. Well, once you finish taking notes, you're not done, right? That's when you need to go back through your notes and make sure your notes help you understand the greater content. Do you feel like just by reading these notes that you understand the important things that you got from your reading? The important things that the professor pointed out during class? Because the professor there's not enough time for him or her to say everything in the class, right? They're just high points. So once again, you need to work with those notes and refine them to get you to that place.
All right. Well, my third one could be a little bit of a contentious tip because it's dealing with digital versus analog. It's dealing with writing versus typing. Which one's better? And I know with technology the way it is today, a lot of students in my classes have their laptops out, and I assume they're working on class stuff. They're not watching TV. Although I have caught somebody watching the Masters in my class. That was actually pretty fun. But and I was more upset because I was jealous he was watching it and I wasn't. But
I caught someone watching the World Cup at one
oh
point,
yeah, that would have
and
been me.
I couldn't get angry at them, but the problem was so many people behind them were watching it as
Yeah,
well.
uh-huh.
It looked like a movie theater where everyone was concentrated on his
Yep.
computer screen, so I had to put an end to it.
Side note for students, if you're not doing coursework, everybody around you will tell the teacher that you're not doing it just by looking at your computer the whole time. So, don't think you're hiding it. But writing versus typing. So there are studies out there that have shown that students remember more information when they write it out by hand versus typing it out on a computer. And that's to me is key. The study and what it does, the study explains that when typing, students tend to try to take more verbatim notes, meaning they try to literally type everything out. Whereas when you're writing, you tend to use more shorthand, abbreviations, and you become more selective about the notes that you write down, which in turn allows them to become more actively engaged in the lecture. And that's where your learning occurs. The note taking is going to, again, help you after the class, but your engagement within the class gets that foundation and that education and the learning going forward while you're there. And so that's why it tends to be better to write than to type. Now, if you're somebody that prefers typing, that's fine. Understand the deficiencies I should say, come with typing, which is the shorthand and being actively engaged. If you want to convert that into typing and just again use shorthand for typing so you can be engaged, then you're compensating for that deficiency.
And AJ, I'll echo something else on that point because I couldn't agree more there. I like to type oftentimes because it's fast.
Mhm.
But when it comes to learning it, when it comes to committing the material that you're taking down to memory, nothing compares to writing it. If you've ever tried it, and if you're very proficient at typing, I've done a lot of transcription in my day, being involved with law, right?
Oh
I've
yeah.
had to, as well as in school. But typing, I can read something or I can listen to something and type at the same time. And because there's this separation of what I'm doing, I haven't committed in any way to memory. I can read a book and type things and not know what the book says because it's just flowing through from the pages to my fingers, right? But you cannot do that with writing. If you read something, you actually have to temporarily memorize it to then scribe it to paper. So with that being said, you're studying how you're learning that material. You are committing it, at least to some degree, to memory. So it's more painful, right? All difficult things are, it's that directed learning, as we call it. And I like to call it the painful type of learning, right? The
Mm.
painful type of practice. But it helps, right? It makes your life easier in the end, okay? Because there won't be as much cramming. The long-term remembering will be better. And so, through school, even when I had a computer, and like I said, I didn't get a computer till after my first year of college, I still wrote everything down. In law school, I was one of the few people that focused primarily on taking notes on paper rather than on a computer because I needed it to be somewhat internalized throughout so it would make my life easier at the end.
Yeah, and even if you're somebody like me, I'm very tech based. I love technology. You still have ways that you can still write it on something digital. So like an iPad or a Windows tablet. You can still write that out and you're still getting the action of writing it out, much like you were saying, instead of just typing it out. So you still have those tendencies. I will say an honorable mention to these tips, which was really interesting when I read it, is that if you write in red or blue ink, you're more like I think you're 31% more likely to remember it than if you wrote it in black ink.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
I didn't either, and I'm just a black ink style person. I never thought about changing ink colors and it being that important.
Well, royal blue is my new favorite. Then
There you go.
I'm a new
What do
royal
you
blue
from the
person.
movie Liar Liar?
Yeah.
All right, so give us your next tip.
Okay, my next tip is focused again on the ultimate objective of learning the material and how note taking plays in there. You take notes on your reading as well as the lecture. If you just read material and then just go on, right? You read everything and you haven't started to internalize the concepts at all as you move forward in things. The further you get away from reading the stuff and the more stuff you put on top of it in a short period of time, you're going to forget it. It's not going to be committed to memory. So taking notes while you're reading a small section and identify the all of one concept that kind of goes together, then take your notes on that reading. Then go to the next paragraphs, take your notes on that reading. So by the end, you have a good set of notes as soon as you get to the end of the reading. You don't have to reread or read the material twice. You can read back down through your notes just to refresh yourself before class. Then when you're in class and you're taking notes on the lecture, you can pay attention primarily to the lecture and what the professor's saying, and you should be able to easily follow down through your notes and see all of the points that are there. If the professor explains something in a different way or expands upon the topic or says something that you had a misunderstanding about prior to hearing that discussion, then you can make your notes out to the side and you can improve your notes. So turning the note-taking process in class into more of a, like I say, you're adding a little bit to the notes that you already have. You're just developing your existing notes further. That is going to make you a much more efficient, proficient note taker.
That makes complete sense. That's one of the reasons why I think I struggled so much when I was in high school going into college, is because I didn't feel like I needed that extra step because I was getting by with my grades on just what I heard in class. In high school, things come a lot slower, and it's,
Yeah.
that you tend to have tests on every chapter, and then, it's broken down more. And then in college, it's like, all right, we're going to go through 5 chapters in 1 week, and you're going to have a test on the next 10 chapters. So I really struggled at the very beginning.
Yeah. And, as you proceed through school, your note taking skills and your ability to translate that into your learning material will change. Law school was every class is you go an entire semester and there's one test at the end, right? Essay type that gives you anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to take it, right? And it's everything rides on that. If you didn't keep up the entire time and for the volumes of material that you have to read, if you don't do a very good job of summarizing first and then outlining, just bulleting everything out, I mean, your outlines for some classes would be 20, 30, 40, 50 pages of just bullets, right? But the material that you're responsible for having read or knowing is hundreds of pages. So if you didn't break it down piece by piece like that, there's no way to recall it and use it efficiently. Okay. So anyway, it's just you're going to see an evolution there, and it's going to change based upon the types of classes you take and the types of material you're learning. So, but from a general standpoint, starting with the reading material and taking notes from there is going to improve your studying habits a lot.
Well, I've got one more tip, and it is something I see too often in my class. And again, I do have a class that is somewhat quantitatively based, where we have to do problems that have processes or steps in which you do it. And so my final tip is, don't fall for what I call the overconfident example problem fallacy. And by that, I mean, when you're sitting in class and you're watching your professor, or maybe you're doing it on a sheet of paper as they go through it, a quantitative problem on the board, you may feel this false sense of, oh, that was easy. I can do that on my own, no problem. And I'm good. However, when you go back home and you start doing your homework, or even if you get on the exam and you see the problem and you feel like, oh, I blanked. I don't remember how to do this. It's not that you blanked necessarily. It's you thought it was easy when somebody else was doing the problem, or they were giving you the cues and the helps to do the problem. But when you have to do it on your own from nothing, it's a whole nother ballgame. So when you're doing problems, I highly suggest you do problems step by step. So don't wait until the professor is finished with the problem to then transcribe it on your sheet of paper. Do it as they go and write yourself notes as to questions that you may have or reasons why you do this or whatnot. That's going to get you further in your studying, but don't take it just at face value that, oh, I understand how they did it on the board, or you have that feeling of, oh, that makes sense, and you're done. You don't have to do any more of it because it made sense in that one moment. Make sure you write that down.
I agree 100%, AJ, and that particularly applies with anything that's procedural in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Start with mathematics. If you can watch it being done on the board and it makes complete sense, doing it yourself is a different story. I'm no accountant, but I've taken a few accounting courses, so I can agree with you 100%, right? A lot of processes. If you don't try that process yourself, you have no idea whether you can actually do it. So a great point. All right, my last one is kind of related to some of the things we've already said, but I'm a big proponent of this, and I know this wasn't something you did you used as a practice in college, but in my opinion, taking notes in class is not very effective for your learning if you don't already know the material. You still have to do it. Okay, you still have to do it. Don't take that as if you don't already know the material walking into the class where you're going to go over it, that note-taking isn't important. You should still do that. It will help somewhat, but it will help exponentially more if you walk into the class feeling like you are comfortable with and understand the material you're going to go over that day. Because as the professor's talking about it, you will start to rewrite some things. You'll start to make some specific points that deepen your understanding. And all of that just makes certain that whatever you've learned stays there, is more ingrained, and you'll be able to use it at the next level, right? So that being said, make certain you know the material before you go into the class.
So it almost sounds like you're saying it's an addendum to my second tip, which is that it's a 2-part process. What you're saying is actually a 3-part process. You have a before class, then an in class, and then an after class.
I like that. We should write that down. It should be our 3-step process.
Well, really quickly, let's end on this last question, because I think we've said all this stuff, and these are all tips that we said, but I think it all comes down to practicing. So what are some hard skill practice techniques you can recommend for becoming a good note taker?
I would say you've got to be able to manage the material you're reading. Vast material like history or literature, or shorter material that tends to be more procedurally broken down, like accounting or finance. You need to be able to break it down into usable chunks. Okay, don't try to that old saying of how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time, right? Same thing with the material. Same thing with the material, right? You've got to break it down into chunks and take those notes on each individual chunk ahead of time. Okay, that's going to help a ton.
Yeah, I would. And the question says hard skill practice techniques. I cannot get that word out. Techniques. I think mine is going to be more on the soft skill side, because I think one of the issues of people who would be quote unquote bad note takers is the feeling of being overwhelmed. And so I think it's a matter of, staying calm and understanding, again, going back to exactly what we just talked about, understand it's a 3-part series. It's a 3-step process. Go ahead and get familiar with the information prior to class, then take your notes in class, and then take the step after class to go through and expand on what you'd wrote, what you've written down. That to me, I think is going to take you further than just doing it within class. So that would be my suggestion for ways to practice, is just take that 3-step approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that. Give you one more hard skill.
Cool.
Learn to type. If you can't,
that's a good one.
If you can't read something beside you and type at the same time, that's going to make aspects of note taking harder. Also, learn to summarize and write quickly with your hand. Bulleting things, drawing little diagrams to help you understand things. It takes practice. That's a hard skill. Okay.
It's so interesting because my son right now, so when I was going, and I'm sure you were the same way, when we were going through middle school, we had computer classes in high school where we had to type and you had to test how fast you can type. My son has yet to have that, and he's going into 11th grade, and he's never had a computer class because I guess they assume that they grew up on computers and they know what they're doing. But the typing aspect of it, I mean, it's like, a chicken pecking for some food. You're letter pecking to try to get, the words out on the screen. So it's pretty rough.
All right. Well, you've got a skill-based function that he needs to work on.
Oh, we've already told him that.
It's gonna save him a lot of time, gonna make him better at what he does. And so I want to echo that for everybody out there, right? You may be a good typist, but be sure that you can set that book beside you and read from that book and type without looking at your fingers, without looking at the screen. Make sure that you can read a paragraph and then from that, without looking at the screen, type it out. That hard skill is going to help you a ton.
Well, this has been an awesome show. And like I wish I'd have had this when I was, like I said, going into college, because this would have helped me quite a bit. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about tips and tricks for studying, which is another area of issue or concern for some students. I will say one of the things that we would like to do with this, Jason and I are going to actually put our top, how many of these, I think we had 5 or so. We're going to put them on our social media so you can have them at your disposal. So hopefully it'll keep up, you'll be able to keep up with these. So be on the lookout for those. Jason, before we leave, do you have anything else you want to tell the listeners?
Just remind everybody, we're here for you guys. So get us your questions, get us your comments, get us your success stories that we can celebrate with you, because this is about you. If you have something you want to know, we want to talk about it.
Also, when we post this on socials, if you would like to comment your own tips to help other people, that would be awesome too. If we can get a community to help get together and share their tips and tricks that's going to help them, it may help somebody else. And again, all we're here for is to make sure we try to help at least one person as they go through college, hopefully many more, but at minimum one. So, but other than that, y'all have a wonderful rest of your weekday, whatever, but goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.